All right, as I share a welcome, please continue to get food and get yourselves situated. It's such a pleasure to gather here together today on our Cal Lutheran campus with our community and friends in order to host the Global Forum series, a lecture series co-sponsored by the Center for Global Engagement and Global Studies Department at Cal Lutheran. I'm Christina Sanchez. I serve as Associate Provost for Global Engagement and have the pleasure of serving as our MC for today's program. Over our lunch gathering, we have the honor of hearing from three esteemed colleagues and friends who are going to share with us a bit about Ukraine's struggles and stories of perseverance. I'll share a brief introduction of each presenter as they join us today and help us learn more about the historical political context, humanitarian efforts, as well as the lived experience. Before we begin, I'd like to welcome Dr. Lorena Munoz, our Associate Dean of Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging, and Director of the Department of Ethnic and Race and Global Studies here at Cal Lutheran, to share our land acknowledgement statement.
Good morning, everybody. Before I actually read the land acknowledgement, I want to acknowledge something else. Today is a day without immigrants, and what that means for us in an educational institution is that we educate, right? So today we ask of all of our immigrant colleagues, community peoples, to abstain from actually going to work, to purchase anything, and basically live your life out in public, right? Since we are in an institution of education, we then call for everybody to actually show up to work, right? And then educate about this. So for those of you who want to support the cause, we ask you not to consume or spend anything. Obviously consume this, but not go out there into a store, put gas, all these things. If you can wait until tomorrow, that will be a way to support this national movement of showing the importance that immigrants have in our fabric of our society, in making our economy run, and making our community better, and for all of us to move ahead together. So with that, I really wanted to put that out there. So if you know a little bit about a day without immigrants, please go out there and advocate for this and tell people about it. Okay? All right, so we acknowledge that California Lutheran University in Thousand Oaks resides on an unceded ancestral sacred land of the Chumash peoples. We express gratitude and appreciation to those whose homelands are the ones on which we live and work. We recognize and honor their long and deep connections to the soil and all the lives it supports. In affirming this land, we also recognize the histories of violence and cultural destruction that occurred alongside the involuntary displacement of many Native communities. As members of this educational community, we wish to examine these truths and not keep them buried away from scrutiny. As we join this program, we are grateful to our Chumash neighbors who teach us through their relationships with us that cultural practices sustain the health of individuals and communities. In these moments, please ground yourself in your body and breath, connected to the land, and call forward your own ancestral lineages. Reconocemos que la Universidad Luterana de California en Thousand Oaks reside en la tierra sagrada ancestral no cedida del pueblo Chumash. Expresamos gratitud y aprecio a aquellos cuyas tierras son las que ahora vivimos y trabajamos. Reconocemos y honramos sus largas y profundas conexiones con esta tierra y con todas las vidas que sustentan. Al afirmar esta tierra, también reconocemos las historias de violencia y destrucción cultural que ocurrieron junto al desplazamiento involuntario de muchas comunidades nativas. Como miembros de esta comunidad educativa, deseamos examinar estas verdades para no mantenerlas enterradas en la sombra. Al unirnos a este programa, agradecemos a nuestros vecinos, los Chumash, que nos enseñan las prácticas culturales que sustentan la salud y la de las personas y las comunidades. En estos momentos, conéctate con tu cuerpo y tu respiración, conéctate con la tierra y convoca a tus propios linajes ancestrales. Thank you.
All right, very fitting that we think of land acknowledgement, immigration, migrants, as we start our program together. So thank you, Dr. Munoz. Our presenter for this segment is well known to our campus community, and I will share a mugshot. Dr. Herbert Gooch is currently Professor Emeritus of Political Science at Cal Lutheran. During his tenure at the university, he formerly served as Director of the Masters in Public Policy and Administration and Assistant Provost for Graduate Studies. A graduate of UC Berkeley in history, he holds an MBA in management and both master's and doctorate degrees in political science from UCLA. He has written extensively and is a frequent commentator on political affairs locally and statewide. He is a champion for upholding the university's mission to educate leaders for a global society through his continued teachings and lecturing, as well as his work with the Rotary Club of Thousand Oaks, which I've had the pleasure of connecting with him in the past through. Please join me in welcoming Herb to offer an express history of the relationship between Russia and Ukraine.
All right. Let me be sure I have all my little technical things. I'm sorry. Let's see if we can get this.
Hold on 1 second.
Da-dum.
Good.
Okay, you want to go one up? Or here, I'll do it. Okie-doke. Christina and the Center for Global Engagement, I offer my thanks. My task is not to tell you what to think, but what to think about, and to try to give you a little bit of an historical background on the situation in the Ukraine today. So I'll necessarily sort of be jumping, sort of like, you know, getting across the ice flow, you're sort of jumping iceberg to iceberg. We will have time for questions and answers afterwards. The plan is that I would go for about 20 minutes, and then the other two for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have collectively a little panel, and you can pose questions. So if I do this right, you should end up with far more questions than you have now. Okay. Well, the Ukraine, just assuming that you don't know very much, let me just race through some things. That the Ukraine is the second largest country in Europe. It has a population roughly that of California. You know, there's been huge immigration out, but it's roughly about 39, 40 million. However, it's about 50% larger in land, so it's a huge, huge area. Remember, Crimea is down here. The big Russian incursions are all throughout the eastern part, in particular the Donbass, which is the area of the major coal and industrial development. Much of the rest, especially the eastern or western part, is much more agriculture. And Ukraine was looked upon as the breadbasket of the Soviet Union. Now, historically, it's important that you remember that in Russian history, the origins of the rise of the Rus, of the Russian people, as well as the center for the dispersion of Greek Orthodox, of religion, goes back to Kiev. So there is an immensely important cultural significance of this area. In terms of languages and the Slavic languages in the upper corner, you see that, and you want to remember this, that Ukrainian and Russian are cognate, very close languages. So you've got Vladimir, but Putin, but then you have Zelensky, Volodymyr. I mean, they're very, very, very close, not precise. The third major, break-off, though, would be White Russian or Belarusian to the north. Ukraine means roughly the borderland area, but the heart of, and certainly from the Russian perspective, the heartland starts in Kiev. In the historical development, the Russians picked up on Christianity and thought of themselves as the third Rome, Byzantium, and then Russian heartland. With the collapse of the Romanov Empire, the Russian Empire in the First World War, 1917, then Lenin, the communists, took over an extended civil war, really horrible and barbarous, as the new Russian state was formed officially in 1922. It was formed as the USSR, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, in theory a federation, just like the United States. But you want to look back. In 1654, this was roughly the area identified as Ukraine. The Romanovs added on to it a huge area, a lot of this at the expense of the Polish-Lithuanian Empire. Then in 1922, when the Republic was formed under the communists, they added a huge area. The result of World War II, an additional area was added, and then in 1954, Khrushchev gifted the Ukraine Crimea. So to some extent, in Putin's mind, it's an artificial state. Well, I don't agree at all, but that's part of the historical background. With the end of the Second World War, you want to realize that you had the USSR, all in red, and it was actually divided in theory into 16 different republics, the largest of which, with 2/3 of the land mass and almost half the population, was Russia. But then you had Ukraine, the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Georgia down here, Moldova, the Ukraine. Whole set of supposedly independent parts of the USSR. And then, of course, you had what had been formerly mostly Central Europe as part of the Eastern Bloc, right? East Germany down through Hungary, Romania, et cetera. So you keep that sort of in mind. Then the next point to flash forward to is the collapse of the USSR between the wall comes down in 1989. By 1991, there's the collapse and the dissolution of the USSR. If you look at this map, you want to see that here is the growth of NATO, North American Treaty Organization, starting in 1949 as the American opposition to the Russians. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, all sorts of things happened. Right? Germany, of course, was united. At this point, Putin is a KGB officer, secret police in East Germany. He's 36 years old. Zelensky is is a student. He's only 15, so there's a big generational gap here. But Putin later wrote of this that he was disgusted at the weakness of the Russian state, Gorbachev in particular, and he said of communism that it was, quote, a blind alley. I still have a lot of friends that somehow think that Putin is a communist. No, he's as much as anything a Russian nationalist, imperialist, whatever you want to call him, but he is not a communist. Anyway, the United States began to expand NATO as Russia was tremendously weakened, so that part of the original USSR, like the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, actually became independent and joined NATO. And then gradually, for the next 15 years, NATO has been extended throughout all of Central Europe. The big issue has been what other states might join it. Well, you want to see that there's not only NATO expanding, but also the tremendous success of the European Union. So that's a magnet, right? I mean, there's wealth. You want to, have your iPhone or not, right? So while while Russia is weak, there's this attraction to the successful West. So that the attraction often is not only to maybe the security NATO might offer, but probably even more than that, the wealth and the being drawn into as a part of Western Europe outside the Soviet bloc that is so tempting to Ukraine, to Georgia, to other states. For Putin, the 1990s, right? The Soviet Union collapses in 92. The president is now Boris Yeltsin. Yeltsin, by most accounts, rarely saw the end of the day except through the bottom of a bottle. The Russian economy largely collapsed, a period of weakness. Yeltsin handpicks Putin, a young man who'd been KGB, had all the right contacts into the security apparatus, who had also taken a doctorate in economics. So you're a perfect, apparatchik, the perfect, kind of guy to put things together. Putin comes in 1999, and I won't go through the various maneuvers that he pulled, but he really successfully pulled Russia out of its economic and military collapse by really essentially appealing to violence at home and a very, very lucky coincidence of the price of oil skyrocketing. And so he built up the economy, he built up the security forces at home, and he began then around 2010 and after to begin to reassert Russian strength in what he thought of as the Russian diaspora, Russian speaking and Russian ethnic groups in a wide variety of areas. And what he wanted to do was to crush the tendency for a number of states to look to the West. So a whole series of endeavors in 2008 and beyond, Abkhazia, South Ossetia, which you probably have never heard of anyway, all sorts of areas he began to assert a strong and aggressive foreign policy and was warning everybody, don't stop it. Don't entertain any alliance with the EU, much less the NATO. That ended up, for our purposes, the key event that we're going to talk about now was in 2014, invading the Ukraine itself and taking Crimea. Ukraine declared independence by an overwhelming 93% vote in 1992. It then agreed 4 states in the old USSR had nuclear weapons, Ukraine being one of them. And Ukraine had some of the most advanced nuclear reactors. And in the 1980s, that's Chernobyl. That's when that melted down. That's actually in the Ukraine. The Ukraine agreed to give back its nuclear weapons. And it was supposedly guaranteed by everybody around in late 1992. The next 10 years is a period of some political instability, some corruption, and the politics, I'm not going to go into, but much of it revolves around groups wanting to go toward the EU and toward possible NATO. There is a mass popular uprising against a Russian-leaning leader. He's thrown out in the big square of the Maidan. It's called the Orange Revolution. And Putin's reaction to that then is to intervene and take Crimea. He also does another thing too. He invests about 13,000 little green men, called little green men because they were put up by the Russians, but there's nothing official, but they were wearing camouflage, etc., into the Donbass. And so Ukraine's really been fighting war since 2014. Right? In 2019, Zelensky is elected. That's also coterminant or about the same time as the Ukrainian-Russian church splits off, which additionally makes Putin very angry. Zelensky's background was that he was a Canadian, or he was a comedian, right, and very popular comedian in Russia itself, as well as it's sort of like there's a famous old American movie, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and he made a movie about this clueless, innocent guy who goes and makes a success of things. He was, well, maybe we can ask Ukrainians about their view of him. But then later that year, that's that background, as you'll remember, that Paul Manafort, Trump's former campaign manager and an operative that had been playing around in Ukraine and Soviet Union, an issue that led to the first effort at an impeachment, right? And it involved the Ukraine. Basically, the argument or the charge was that Trump had refused or had said only in return for political favors giving us information against Biden or the Democrats, we'll give you foreign aid on condition for that. Oops. Here we go. Now fast forward a couple more years. And you've got February 24th, which will now be coming up to the 3rd anniversary of Putin's invasion of the Soviet Union. Why? Big question mark, and there's all sorts of literature about it, and ultimately we don't know entirely what was in Putin's mind, but here are some factors to think about. One was that in Putin's mind, it was both the strength and the weakness of the West. The strength was that the Americans were using NATO as a kind of imperialistic move to strategically cut off Russia from a position of being able to defend itself, right, basically. On the other hand, Putin's calculus was based on his perception of the weakness of the West. And the weakness was, you remember, we had pulled out of Afghanistan in a really sloppy, bad way. I mean, it just seemed to demonstrate that we were clueless about standing up to do anything. But it's not only whether we would have remained there to fight, but our withdrawal demonstrated that we just looked absolutely clueless. Also, NATO itself did not look very strong. Remember, a few years before, the British had left. The French and the Germans are the key to the unity of NATO, seem to be at each other's throats. And there was the calculation that Russian gas and oil, Europe couldn't do without it. Lastly, there was the calculation that in 2014, the United States and NATO had reacted with sanctions and isolation. And you know what? They hadn't hurt the Soviet Union that bad. It went for other markets, in particular with the Chinese. So that from Putin's point of view, oil and his allies, he could withstand whatever the West would do, but he didn't think they had the will to do much of anything anyway. He felt also that Zelensky was a joke. I mean, untested, a comedian. You know, what did he know about anything? So the idea was kick the door in and the whole thing will collapse. And then there's the personality of, which is unknowable, really, with Putin. He's ex-KGB. He thinks in terms of Russian imperialism, how paranoid he might be. We don't know. I mean, you can read sort of all sorts of different things. But clearly, he thought he could get away with it with what he called a special military operation that was basically going to be a quick hit, right? Using in particular shock troops. The idea wasn't to try to absorb the whole thing, but to, like a decapitation, hit Kharkiv and in particular Kiev, do it really fast, and the whole thing was supposed to collapse. Well, it didn't. Part of that was also Americans sharing the military, not just weaponry, et cetera, but their satellite information, et cetera. So they knew what was coming. If you look, this is a map as of that February that the Russians had Crimea. It also had areas of the Donbass, remember the little green men. Right? Then what they did was they attacked widely, but the big idea was essentially really fast, right? The whole thing supposedly was going to fall apart. Well, it didn't. I mean, there were tremendous areas taken back by the Ukrainians, right? Especially by Kherson and Kharkiv. But gradually, this whole area by the Sea of Azov was taken, and that becomes a kind of corridor. What the Russians would love to be able to have done was to go through this area and to link up with Moldova and Transnistria. I don't want to confuse you too much, but they were pushed back. And then in 2023, the Ukrainians tried a big offensive, and it just got stymied. So you've had more or less a stalemate ever since. Broken, though, by a couple of things. At one point, the Ukrainians went into the oblast of Kursk up here in the very far north. They've been pushed back a lot, but that's where you've read about North Koreans coming in. They have not been used in Ukraine. They've been used on Russian territory in the Kursk area. They've now been pulled off the front lines because of apparently the high rate of casualties. Big fighting right now is by Pokrovsk. And the Russians have been slowly moving forward, right? It's largely a war of attrition, resembling almost World War II. I mean, very, 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 very bloody Okay, a couple other things and then I'll get out of the way. That's produced a huge exodus of people out of refugees, and the Russians have been trying to systematically degrade the energy and the transportation resources and infrastructure of the Ukraine. So it's really been horrible because of a lot of bombing in the cities, and I'm sure we're going to go into all that. But you want to remember there's been a huge diaspora of people outside, in particular to Poland. It's more or less a strategic stalemate, characterized on the U.S., NATO, Ukraine side by escalating aid from abroad and also weaponry. The idea under Biden was you go slow because the Russians are threatening use of tactical nuclear weapons, which you want to be very clear is very, very possible because of precision targeting and the recent development of smaller and smaller nuclear yields. So this is very scary these days. But that explains why the kind of weaponry NATO and the U.S. have been using has been slow. It's crossed several lines in the sand that Putin has drawn. No, we'll use nuclear weapons if you don't. And he's sort of backed off. But it is not a threat that is idle. There have been huge sanctions, isolation, and NATO itself has expanded as Sweden and Finland have joined, which has then meant an additional 800 miles of NATO actually on the border with Russia in the north. From the Russian point of view, it's settled into a war of attrition. Putin has formally annexed 4 oblasts or provinces of the Ukraine, in addition to the Crimea, Donetsk, 4 areas, as I talked about, along the Azov Sea. He's threatened nuclear. He's drawn very close to China. I mean, hugely close to China, but also North Korea, and they have an investment of about 10 to 15,000 North Korean troops. Last point, are we going to get some sort of resolution of this? Right? Well, think about it. What could Zelensky give up and remain credible in power? What could Putin give up or trade and still remain in power? And then what about the factor of Trump? It's just this huge wild card. He's said that he could get peace in 24 hours. Well, it's been 2 weeks. Nothing on the horizon, but he has talked about cutting off aid, so the Biden people have shoved as much through our systems, sort of slotted in as possible. But now you see in just this weekend how much USAID aid, et cetera, is now being gutted. So can NATO and the Europeans fill in without the Americans? Well, it's going to be pretty hard to do. Very hard for them to do. So, and we have no idea what is on Trump's mind. We do know that his ego wants now not to be the most powerful, most recognized person on earth, but he wants the Nobel Peace Prize. Right? So he's got a shot. Eventually he'll try something in the Middle East. He'll try something, with Ukraine. Whether he's capable of doing that is an entirely different question. And right now, because of the attack on the deep state, just call it government itself and everything we do, that's all under attack. And so no matter what people say, do we have the resources to keep supplying Ukraine? So maybe when we get later, we can talk about that. Okay.
before we transition to our last speaker, I also wanted to extend a special thanks to the members of the Ascension Lutheran Church Global Ministries team under the chairpersonship of Ms. Louise Emerson right here in our midst, who spearheaded the initiatives in order to raise funds and have the shipment of lights sponsored and going forward. If everybody a part of that community could raise your hands for all the good work that you're doing. Look at this. That really makes my heart sing. And of course, Pastor Steve Herder, a special thanks for the involvement and engagement coming from you and the team at Ascension Lutheran at large. So thank you so much. All right. Our final speaker, before we go to Q&A from the general audience, I've asked Ms. Ola Isieva to join us. She is an alumnus of Cal Lutheran University, having received her master's in the College Counseling and Student Personnel program here at the institution and just graduated last year. She is an accomplished young individual and truly an ambassador of raising awareness, fulfilling our mission as well for global education in order to learn more about the Ukraine. And so I've prepared a few questions that I'd like to ask of Ola, and then we will have all of our panelists come together to respond to any questions that you have over the past few moments together. So, Ms. Ola.
Miss Ola. Hi.
Welcome. So many of our audience members may not have known as much about the Ukraine as now we have some insights. Can you share with us some of your reflections about Ukraine culture and community that offer us a broader perspective?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's so great seeing you all, and you have no idea how much it means to me that you're all here and that you care for Ukraine, especially these days when we're hitting the 3-year mark. It's kind of hard to believe that there is somebody else who cares still. So thank you so much for being here and having me. And yes, so I remember when I just got here, my first days of orientation, I was making friends and students were asking me where I'm from. So I said Ukraine, and nobody knew where was that. They're like, is that the country? Is it like somewhere in Asia? I'm like, sure, yeah, yeah. And you know, I've never appreciated Ukraine because you always feel like the grass is greener somewhere there in the U.S., always in the U.S. And you don't see how much value you have, how amazing Ukraine is and how many talented people it has. And after the full invasion started, I kind of started rediscovering Ukraine for myself. And I found out that we have so many kind of people who work on new innovations. So for instance, you know all PayPal, you know Grammarly. Did you know that Ukrainians stand behind that? I had no idea about that too, but I discovered about that like 3 years ago. And what was it like Ukraine before full invasion? You know, I'm so lucky that I was born in Ukraine because I know that in my veins I have so much resilience that helps me to go through each day of my life. And I know that if I were from any other country, I would probably give up this US idea and I would just go back home, cry in my bed. But just knowing that there's so much strength and power in my nation and in the history of Ukraine, it gives me so much will and that power to fight for my freedom, to fight for what I want. So yeah, that was very short, weird answer to your question.
It was perfect and very genuine and heartfelt. So thank you. Tell us a little bit about your journey going from the Ukraine to the United States.
Okay, so as I mentioned, I've been dreaming about coming to the U.S. for all my life, and I've been imagining myself sitting there in Hollywood and enjoying my tequila. I'm kidding. And so everybody knew that I wanted to go to U.S. And then one day, very good friends of our family, they live here in U.S. They moved from Ukraine like 30 years ago, and they offered to sponsor my education here in US. So I spent literally 2 years of my life just studying English, passing all those TOEFL tests, super annoying. I kind of paused my whole life just for the sake of getting here. So it was really hard, and I was applying for different universities, and I would get denied because my first degree is in teaching. I'm an elementary school teacher. And I was applying for programs such as linguistics, sociology, and I believe people here, they don't really see the connection between being a teacher and being interested in linguistics, but whatever. I saw the connection in my statement of purpose. I could show that. And then one day, we were trying hard for 2 years with this host family applying, and there was no. And the more no you get, I was so close to lose hope. I was so close to give up. I'm like, no, I'm done. And then one day, this host family, they were driving by CLU, and they're like, oh, we didn't know there was a university. So they sent me the link to the university to check out the programs. And I found this one, counseling. And I felt like I do really want to work in education. I don't want to deal with small kids, but yeah, I wanted to stay in education sphere, and I applied, and in 2-3 weeks I got admitted. I got my visa, and yeah, 3 years ago I came here to study. So that was, thank you. And that was quite a great match. Like, it was kind of the only university that I applied for, I was hoping to get into, and I got admitted, and I never got disappointed. This is where I found the most amazing people, honestly, that helped me to grow as an individual and as a leader. Hi, Dane. He was my boss, and he's the person whom I'm very thankful. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, we're very thankful that you chose Cal Lutheran and that it was a good match. As Ola returned to visit us now that she's living up in Washington, she said she's returning home, and it feels like a second home. So that means a lot to us here. Well, when you're thinking of home and different environments and coming to the United States from outside of the U.S., as well as any time you're entering into a different cultural environment, there is culture shock. Do you want to share a little bit about some of the elements of culture shock you
Absolutely.
experienced?
Well, the people who know me, they know the story that I tell everyone. Stop. Don't laugh yet. Okay, so the first culture shock was that, well, everybody's so nice here, which I really appreciated. It was really sweet when you talk to a stranger and they're so open and helping and welcoming, which was so opposite from, not really opposite from my culture, but we're like very straightforward people. We're like, either we help you or we don't like you, whatever. We're fine. But the weirdest thing was going, for example, for groceries to Trader Joe's and doing those small talks about weather. I honestly, it took me probably a year to learn how to keep up with those conversations. Because, like, why would you talk about the weather if we all live in the same climate? We live the same California state. It's always sunny. Why would you talk about the weather all the time? Then I would receive all those questions. So what are your plans for the weekend? I was so intimidated by that. I'm like, why are you supposed to know my plans for the weekend? It's my private information. I'm not going to disclose that. But they were just like trying to be nice. And okay, I learned. Another thing, the food, I'm still struggling with that. But when I just got here, we were trying to find something that I would enjoy, that would make me feel better, and I would not feel hunger anymore. And we went to New York Deli. I had no idea what was that. And we ordered the best thing that would help you with if you're feeling not well, which is soup, right? Right. That was the most spiciest soup in my life. I could not understand why is everything so spicy here. Why? Okay. Another thing, everyone's here drinks water with ice. I don't get it. Like, the water from the fridge is already cold. Why would you put an ice in it? So it's just so many these bizarre things that were so weird to me. But at the same time, I was admiring, like seeing those differences between us. It helped me to value what I have and what I have to offer and what is like US is giving me. And in the beginning, I was really anxious about everything. I would but in the end of the day, I would reflect on myself and my behavior, what kind of jokes I made, and I can't stop making jokes. I'm so sorry. And I would like, damn, that was a stupid joke. Oh no, why would I say that? That was a stupid comment. That was not grammatically not correct sentence. Oh my gosh, I'm so dumb. And then thankfully, I was surrounded by such an amazing team at my work, Dr. Sanchez, Dane, and my classmates who were admiring those differences that I had. And they're like, wow, I appreciate your humor. Wow, I love your accent. Wow, you're so smart. I'm like, me? Okay. And I learned to appreciate that Ukrainian side of me, and kind of I started appreciating how different I am from everybody, and people still okay with me. They still tolerate me, I guess. But yeah, it's just, I appreciate having those differences between us because it helped me personally to grow and be more aware of cultures and what like that special uniqueness that we each of us have in us. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So Ola, when you first came to Cal Lutheran and joined us, and your mother came at that point in time as well, it was right when the invasion was happening in the Ukraine, just at the start of the war. Tell us a little bit about your experience and how you and your family are
doing. I'll try not to cry. So yeah, my mom came to visit me literally a week before the full invasion. And I will always remember that day of full invasion. It was probably like 7 p.m. on 23rd of February because Ukraine is ahead of us. And I remember she was just checking news on the phone, and she said the war started. And I'm like no way. So the thing is that before that, we've been hearing some rumors that the war might begin, but it never felt like it would become reality. And then mom was reading news, I was checking the news, and we would read that there's missiles flying, bomb, the people are just like trying to escape. And so I would start checking on all my friends, my family. We were trying to convince my younger brother, who was still at that time, he was in Ukraine, he was 21 at that point, and we were trying to convince him to leave the country. But that's something about Ukrainians. Instead of running, so many men and women, they just stood up and they're like, I'm gonna fight for my country, I'm gonna fight for my home. And my brother, he was one of them. He was like, I'm gonna stay. I don't want to be that person who runs from that. I want to be here, I want to be home with my country, with my people. And while here, I don't remember the first month of full invasion. I don't remember what I was doing. I remember I was checking news all the time. I would wake up in the middle of the night. I would just constantly read news. And I really don't remember studying. I was studying, I guess, but it was just like so like kind of like automatically just living day from day to day. And the worst thing that kind of I felt is that I felt guilty for being here. I felt that I'm not with my family. There are people dying for my country, and I'm here in the US living under the sunny sky without missiles flying above me. I'm safe. I have food. I have electricity. And I really wanted to go back home. I didn't want to enjoy life here while my people are suffering out there. So it was really hard, and so my mom couldn't go back home. She was planning on staying with me in California for like a couple of weeks, like 3 weeks. She couldn't go back home, so she had to find a job in Washington. But then like by the summer, my older brother, who lives in Slovakia, he took her in, and now she's there with him. But I must tell you, this is the worst feeling to have to read the news and just know that you don't know if tomorrow you're gonna wake up and your dad will answer your phone call. You just don't know, and that was the worst. And sadly, or I don't know how to say that, but over time you get used to it. You kind of get used to the war, and this is the scariest feeling when you get used to war. You get used to bombs, you get used to missiles flying. But I guess what I just left is just hoping that something will change one day. But yeah.
Well, that stays in all of our thoughts and prayers, that someday we will see some peace come back for your country. You made a very difficult decision, talking about your family, your friends, your passion for your country, and you decided to go back to visit during the war. Can you share some of your reflections?
Yeah, I know that was a tough decision, and for so many people to let me go. I know, like specifically Dane, he was my boss at that time, and he let me not only to go to Ukraine, but it's not like he could stop me, but he let me to work remotely still. So I decided in summer 2023, I went back home for 3 weeks. It was really hard journey because I had to fly from LA to Austria. Then my mom would pick me up. Then we would take a bus, and we were going on the bus for 28 hours straight. It was really hard. And the thing is that, so in my hometown, I live in the Poltava region, so it's basically kind of in the center, and where the bus station is by the huge, like the biggest mall in my hometown, and that mall was destroyed 2 years ago. And I used to spend so much time on that mall, and there's so many losses. And when I remember when we were like driving the bus and we were just stopped there was no mall. There was just empty space, and it was so weird to kind of, it didn't feel real. It was just so bizarre. And as we were entering Ukraine, I would start seeing those destroyed buildings, the burned cars, the like traces from bullets. I saw the bridges that were like they exploded the bridge in the beginning when during the first 3 days when there was a attack on Kiev. They destroyed the walking bridge to stop the Russian army. And I saw that with my own eyes, which like I did see that on the pictures, but seeing that in person, that hits you differently. That's just unimaginable. And then I saw my brother finally. We reunited with my family. It was so great to see finally my friends. And as we were kind of catching up on things with my friends, it was so weird to kind of see them being okay with the war, get used to it. My friends knew what kind of missiles are flying. They knew all kinds of drones. They knew the weapon. They knew there's a chat where it says what kind of missile is flying, and they knew by the name of the missile how much time do they have till they have to go to the bomb shelter. So, for instance, I was on a walk with my best friend, and she was like, "Oh yeah, BM12. Okay, so we have like 5 minutes. So do you want to like stop by the store? Do you want to like finish shopping?" I'm like, oh my gosh, this is insane. But this is the reality you have to live in. You have to deal with that. You have to learn to kind of move on, because you can't be in that alert state all the time. You have to move on. But I was when I was in Ukraine, there were no missiles flying while I was there, but I did hear we had drones while I was there, and there was drone flying above our house. So I remember I was talking to Dane in the chat, and I said like I have to turn off the lights, I had to turn everything, so I'm gonna be back, but we have to like kind of like keep it down. It's scary. It's the sirens going every day, and when the siren is going, all stores have to be closed. So you kind of, if you haven't finished your shopping, you just have to leave the store and try it again maybe tomorrow. So it's just hard. And with all those blackouts, it was terrible. It was terrible. But the most impressive thing is that Ukrainians are still standing, and they still had at that time, they still had so much hope, so much strength. They had so much sense of humor. They would like joke about everything. And that was, I really kind of appreciated even again that I'm Ukrainian and I can share that strength in me as well. So yeah.
Well, we certainly see so much strength in you, and you know, the spirit that you bring is enriching to all of us, and appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing about your experiences with us today. Thank you. So a round of applause for Ola.
Thank you.
And then I'll invite our speakers to come back forward to this table so that we can do some questions from the audience.
Before we have our guests over, can I share one more thing? As you know, Dave is doing this amazing project with Ray of Light, and yesterday I was talking to Louise, and she said this phrase that really stuck with me. She said, it's really easy to be depressed, it's really easy to lose hope, it's really easy to be sad, but to be hopeful, to keep that hope, you have to work on it. And when I was sharing with my dad is like a very specific person. He's like very tough guy, and he doesn't believe in kindness, in hope. He's not. But I was sharing with him about the amazing things that Dave's team does, the Ascension Church, and I was sharing about the Rays of Light. And he said this thing just once in his life. He'd never said anything like that before. He said, wow, there are people who cares. They do those lives for us. That actually brings hope. So I just want you to know how much it means that somebody cares for us. Just knowing that somebody out here in the US, that you work on something, that you try to help this, it helps so much. It brings hope. So thank you so much.
So if you have a question, I'll come to you. I mean, I have a question since you are thinking about it. Thank you, all three of you. This was amazing. I do have a question, particularly in your pictures, Dave, of people that were of retirement age, or they were elderly, right? So it just struck me that those are the folks that are left behind in these spaces with no children. And what do you think the role is, or the lifeline of kind of like the products, the lights, and the food that you all distribute in relation to the age of the folks that are there?
Ukraine is a garden country, and I asked Antvalia in Preobrazhenka, while we were sitting around her table, I said, can you get meat? And she said, only if you have a pig. And I said, can you get other staples? And she said, we can get some. We have our garden. The thing that she said that they couldn't get was medicine. So with some exceptions, in Eastern Europe, people age quickly. And I've had people comment to me like, wow, that's, you're that. And I think that the people that are there, because I spent 3 days at the border in Isacha, Romania, walking people up to the processing tent when they crossed the Danube into Romania, and they weren't the people that you saw pictures of. But the people that are still there are the people that don't have the resources or the wherewithal to leave, or they're choosing because of a family member to stay, or the resolve and the resilience is way at the top of their head, and they ain't going nowhere, regardless of what the terrorists do to them. So I don't know if that answers your question pointedly, but but I have seen in the faces that I've seen now a number of times the countenance dropping, and hope is a little bit in short supply close to the front line currently.
Thank you. Question?
I have a question for Herb. You mentioned that you weren't sure what was going to happen. Do you think it's going to, that Putin will take over?
Well, there's no real way to figure what the future is at this moment. You're reading a lot about the casualties in in Russia and a weakening economy, but Putin's not going to move over, and there's no evidence at all that he's going to get toppled by a coup or anything like that. The war is still fairly popular, and he really has not fully mobilized the entire economy. For instance, there's no mobilization. This is technically not a war, but a special military operation. So you look at Putin, and it's very hard to read things, but he's going to keep going as long as he can. The problem is on the Ukrainian side, and the American side. And the Ukrainian side, because of it's a war of attrition. They're going after the whole infrastructure, and it really is, urban terrorism. I mean, it's another way to put it. And the manpower. I mean, Ukrainian, the ability to fight back, and their ability to restructure, their own manufacture of a lot of weaponry, et cetera. But they're really ultimately in a weakened and a weakening position. And then if you look at NATO and the U.S., especially with Trump, I mean, things are not looking very happy. I would note that the recent effort of Musk and other people to, basically try to abolish USAID. Specifically, they've mentioned the Lutherans, how it's an evil, maniacal kind of group. I mean, what do you do with people that are thinking that way? So if the Americans step back, is NATO ready to fill in? Well, NATO has just huge problems right now, huge problems. And it's were I Zelensky, I'd be extraordinarily worried. I would not give up hope. I mean, what the great surprise has been what Ola, mentioned. The surprise to Putin and the rest of the world is Ukraine stood up and said, "Hey, you're not going to run us over." So they're going to keep fighting, but things are looking increasingly not quite so optimistic. Let me say, I don't know how Putin's going to keep going. There's no end in sight. The Chinese are solidly behind him, and he's got an economy that is proven to be resilient, and he's going to keep going.
Oh, hello. So I apologize if it's a bit of a long question, but I remember at the beginning of the war, Putin made this ridiculous statement that the reason we're going into Ukraine is because we need to denazify them. And I find it very hypocritical, right? Because Russia has Nazi fighters of their own, like the Rusich Battalion, or Dmitry Utkin, the founder of Wagner, the private military organization. It's a neo-Nazi, right? So that is worrying. And on the other hand, Zelensky is from Jewish ancestry, and I think the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, is like Crimean Tatar. So to me, this proves that notion that Ukraine is somehow managed by neo-Nazis, right? But one thing that has worried me when I followed, the news, and I've seen more than once, some soldiers for Ukraine using patches like referencing controversial figures like Stefan Bandera, or the SS Galicia, or the Azov Battalion, which was part of the official Ukrainian military. And although I know they're a small part of the whole, that does worry me that once peace is established, what will the Ukrainian government do to make sure these people do not become an issue to integrating into NATO or integrating into the European Union? And again, I'm not doing this to do like a moral relativist position. Like, none of this horrible stuff would be happening had Russia not invaded. But it's a question that I have not seen someone answer, even though I've seen like Zelensky's interviews. I understand maybe he doesn't want to answer it yet because that would give information to the Russians, but like especially from the Ukrainian perspective, I want to hear like what is the position on, let's say, this controversial people, which on one hand, you know, in war you have to send anyone who's willing to fight to the front. But once peace is established, how do you make sure this doesn't ruin, you know, Ukraine's peace? Thank you.
Well, it would be very, very hard to answer that because it depends on how it ends and whether it ends on what terms. Clearly, within the Ukraine, the political situation, there are wide variety, a huge spectrum of political groups. Who would triumph? Well, it depends on what the terms are that things end and whether, say, Zelensky is there or somebody else. I mean, we just don't know. There are far-right groups within the Ukraine. Try the United States. We've got our, you know, it depends on how strong the state that is left is and whether there is sufficient foreign aid and help. I mean, the Ukrainian economy has been destroyed. And I mean, there are certain sectors that you know that are, you know, in agriculture that have, you know, and a sort of a war machine that's been built up, et cetera. But you know, we don't know what would happen with that, and whether if there is a Ukraine that is guaranteed some sort of security militarily, that's also accompanied by a buildup economically of the economy. And how far would NATO go to build it up? I mean, you could end up with a weak state. I mean, we don't know, in which case either far left or far right could resurface. I mean, we just don't know.
I have a thought, and it's a bit of a parallel thought, but that's a really good question and very well thought out. Mm-hmm. I would say that the parallel thought would be, you know, people still walk their dogs. You know, people still hold their hands when they cross the street. They still sit in the park and look in each other's eyes. They still have birthday parties and toasts. But the reality for the Ukrainians that I have interacted with and the conversations I've had that directly gets at that question that you asked is they're worried about surviving through the night. And I don't think that maybe in the halls of power, because I'm talking, you know, people in the villages and people like the Mariupol Chaplains Battalion, maybe in the halls of power those conversations are occurring. From my observation and the various conversations I have, they're more concerned about getting up in the morning alive. The term is Russian roulette in relation to the bombs.
Okay, one last question. Okay, I'll go over here.
Well, I already knows I'm going to ask her a question. I just wanted to know if there's anything else you didn't get to share that you wish people knew, or any other sentiments you wanted to share with us before we close.
I feel like I can talk about the whole thing over and over at the same time. It's just, so, you know, we all know what is happening. It's really, I guess when the full invasion started, it was so hard for me to kind of even maintain friendships with people or even maintain conversations, because people would talk about, you know, usual stuff about life, movies, stuff, And while in my thoughts, I would always think, well, but there are people who are dying, but there are people who are just witnessing injustice right now while we are enjoying our popcorn, while we're enjoying our tea or like movies. And as of now, like I understand that if you're not from Ukraine, you don't have to worry about Ukraine, right? Like, this is not fair of me expect you to care for someone who you're not related to, who you've never been. So I just really appreciate you, every one of you who are here, and you bring me hope and you bring that care that I have. I guess what I sometimes kind of looking forward in people is that to see that care, to see even that little gesture, like asking, how is it everything going in your home country? How is your family doing? Like you. Just those little signs of care. You have no idea how much it means to me and to my people that I share with them what you guys do, and those little things, they make difference. So I guess maybe something that I didn't say is that sometimes we think we can't help if we don't like spend money on what's it called, into like we don't volunteer in something, or we don't send money for foundations or something, but we can support each other with those little things just by acknowledging each other in each other's journeys. So yeah, thank you, Tess.
Well, a big round of applause. For your reflections and words.
Thank you.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you all to attending today's program. We're really appreciative that you came. We wanted to let you know there are a couple of upcoming programs as well that the center is hosting this week, indeed. So for our students tomorrow in this very same room, you'll learn about opportunities for study abroad and come and explore. A lot of our providers who are offering these different destinations to us and opening the world to expand our global perspectives will be here on campus. And then we are also having our Lunar New Year celebration coming up. And as I think of our programs and events, I would be most remiss to not also be thanking those individuals who make all of this magic happen. Discreetly in the back of the room, Mrs. Zara Amir Mokri, who really shepherds us with our global engagement and outreach work, as well as serving as our lead advisor for education abroad opportunities. We are joined, our graduate assistant, her first event, Purva Mortera, is joining us as well. And we have many more opportunities coming into the future. Of course, there are those behind the scenes, the additional team members in the Center for Global Engagement, as well as our Sodexo catering staff, our facilities team, the individuals behind the scenes doing the recording of today's program and event for us. So we know so much would not be able to happen without all of the help and support that happens sometimes without us even knowing. So thank you to all. We have as well just a moment of thanks and gratitude. It has been such a special and impactful moment to gather and to hear your comments and reflections that our speakers have shared with us. I know it is a program that will stay near and dear in my heart, and I thank you for the energy and effort to make today happen. So thank you to our amazing panelists. And Dave has shared a quote in the past: light brings hope, and hope keeps people alive. So continue to bring your light to the world. Thank you.